All right. Shabbat Shalom. Well, I just got back from South America, so I'm going to try to make the switch from Spanish to English. I've been trying, I told my wife we need to learn more English because my accent is getting thicker. I've been focusing a lot the last few years on the Spanish ministry, which is really growing. So I got to practice English now, which is kind of good. So thank you for having me, Pastor. It's always nice to have you. And I've always liked coming here. You guys are great. Thank you for being kind to my son, by the way. Nice to see you, Lucy. Yeah. My son is cool. He's a nice guy, you know. Maybe I'm a little granddaughter. She looks just like me, I know. I know. She doesn't. That's for sure. Yeah. She looks just like her dad. I know, right? My wife, my daughter-in-law, my daughter and daughter-in-law, and my son Tito. And then tomorrow, my son and my granddaughter will be there. So I'm delighted to be back. Thank you so much for having me. It was like I called Pastor. Hey, Pastor, I'm going to be in your area. Would it be great to go see you? He goes, hey, you can teach us. But in reality, I'm just glad to just be with you. I don't know if you know, Pastor and I really love him. We went to Vegas together to do a tactical shooting course. We were roomies. We survived it. Man, and we're still friends. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. It's like Israel. You know, it's like tell people to Israel, if you know, Lucy and Gary came with me to Israel, and I told people, I said, if you're friends with me after 15 days, we'll be friends forever. You know, you get to see the good, you get to see the good and the bad and everything there. Israel is an amazing experience. We're going to go back, God willing. I know the wars are there, but it'll be quick. We know who's going to have the victory. And we're going to take a tour back in December, God willing. And then in Spanish, in late November and December 1st through. Yeah, here we go. December 8th to the 22nd. So I think you're going to have a good time. Do it right before Hanukkah. So it's going to be a really good experience. I hope you don't be afraid of going to the land, guys. You know, many people are afraid of going to the land. I know things get difficult, but don't ever be afraid. I was there in May, and everything was great. We know their issues, but we know who the God of Israel will protect. More than ever, we got to pray for this country. Let's pray we make it to November. Hallelujah. You know, we need some true deliverance right now. Oh, Lord have mercy. You know, and the Lord is doing something. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to share with you a new project that I'm trying to do. It's in the starting phases. This was part of a course that I did on my temple courses. I have temple courses every year in Orlando. Next year is going to be May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. 3 days. It's an intensive temple course for 3 days in Orlando, Florida. My teacher and I, Joseph Good, we teach 4 or 5 times a day, you know, an hour and a half each teaching. And it's an intensive course on the temple. If you guys want to go to that, please go to wisdomintourevents.com. I think you get a lot out of it. So what I'm trying to do is I want to go through the whole New Testament, every book, and look for the language of the temple. You know, many of us, when we study the Bible, we never consider that the Bible was written in a particular language to an audience, living in a geographical location. And sometimes we fail to understand the audience and to whom it was given to. Many times because we have inherited certain types of teachings that basically don't give us that foundation. We struggle trying to understand and to see it. But once you study the temple and the language of the temple, the functions of the temple, then you'll be hard-pressed to go through a chapter in a book of the New Testament and not see something related to it. I mean, 613 commandments, right? 279 of them are connected with the temple. That's 45%. 45% of your Bible is directly linked with that temple that you see there. Unfortunately, many people have not really taken the time, or it's not an area of focus of study. I'm one of those kind of weird guys who loves the temple. My teacher has been doing it now for 44 years. And I see that model over there. You have no idea how amazing that model is. I mean, no clue. I pray that some of you will spend time sometime going through it. There's a lot there. We can spend 1 hour just on the entrance. Then when you go into the court of the women, that's another hour. And it's exciting because We learn a protocol. We learn how to approach God. We learn how to, understand what it takes to come into sacred space. Amen? Just like Shabbat. Father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we give you honor and praise. We thank you for the honor and the privilege to be your servants. We thank you for the opportunity to share by your word, to be part of your kingdom. I pray that everything we do and say will be pleasing according to your will, that you open the understanding and the wisdom and the discernment of your people, that we can come closer to you and come near you in a manner and in a way that you deserve in reverence and in awe and in fear. In the name of Yeshua, amen. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through certain examples. Clearly, this is a 3-hour teaching. We're not going to do that tonight. All right? I had the privilege to do it in Chile. I was in Paraguay, in Argentina, and Chile. And in Chile, I was able to do it basically the same one for 2 days. 2 days. And I'll have the opportunity to expound on each example. And once you start in one place, someone asks a question, and you go someplace else. And it's a really cool, interesting research that you do. So I hope that whatever I share with you today will be compelling enough for you to say, hey, I've never heard that before. Let me go back and look it up. Amen? All right, so when we study the temple, let me see if this thing works. It should work. There you go. When we study the temple, let me go back. There it is. Understand that the temple really is the throne of God on the earth. Ezekiel 43 says it is the throne of God. That's the place where he would rest his feet. All right, now, we know that the earth really will become the temple of God again after, millennial reign, and the book of Revelation tells us about this stuff. Tomorrow we're going to be learning about the other thing that is going to explain to us why Yeshua died and resurrected. I mean, I was able to talk to a friend of mine in Israel who's a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi for 31 years, and I was able to present to him, I think, last year. I don't remember anymore. It was last year, a year and a half ago. I stayed at his house. We were having Shabbat, and we were having a conversation. And we began to talk about the Bible, as we always do. Understand we've been friends now close to 10 years. And we can freely talk about anything. And he knows that I'm outside the box, because in Judaism, they stay within the framework of what they study. So he knows I'm not in that framework. I could go outside the bounds. And he goes, so what are you studying now? And I asked him a question, said, what is it that the Torah cannot do for you? What is the only thing the Torah cannot do for you? By the way, the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 27 and 29 tells you. The book of Galatians, chapter 3, verse 20 and 21 tells you. But we never really catch on to the nuances of the language that allows us to understand the purpose and the function and the role of Yeshua. So I asked him, what is the only thing the Torah cannot provide in and of itself, which is salvation. Salvation is solely on the king's desire. He is a gift that the great king, the creator of the universe, will give upon somebody in exchange for your allegiance. It's in exchange for your loyalty. That's what Paul is talking about. The whole confession of faith in Romans chapter 10, verse 9. If you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is your Kyrios, your master, your Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. In other words, God says, it's not the emperor. Paul is telling us, it's not the emperor who's your master. It's Yeshua whom God appointed to be your master. So you have to denounce the authority of the master of this world and accept the one that God has placed in authority, which is the Messiah. But we have to understand the mechanism of our faith. Sometimes we really quite don't. We have it in a way that they tell us, well, Yeshua died for me, he resurrected. But the question is, why did he resurrect? Why did he have to die for all of humanity? Hebrews chapter 2 is quite clear on this. But unfortunately, we don't quite understand the language of the temple in relationship to what the resurrection represented, to the ancient world as well as in the first century. And this is why when I went to Turkey, I had the privilege to go to Turkey, Greece, and Rome. My family and I went. We recorded over how many videos? 60? Close to that, roughly. Just make up a number, it's okay. About 50 in Spanish and in English. You want to know more about that, go to Wisdom in Torah on YouTube, and you can see all the short clips. I think the longest is like 30 minutes, but they range between 3 to 5, 10, 15 minutes. We went to Corinth, Athens. We went to Thessalonians, where the Thessalonians, the letter was written, to Philippi, Ephesus, all Pergamum, we went to all the 7 churches. We went to Rome. I'm telling you, your life will change. You go to those places, and then you'll understand the New Testament a little bit better. Okay? So when we study the temple is all about life. People focus on the building. Yes, the building is important. You have no idea. Many people really are not tuned in to the importance of what the building represented and its functions. That's not the topic tonight. But what we're going to be focusing on is certain verses that has a language within the verses that when we study them, we will really gravitate to understanding more about the function and the services. And I'll give you some examples of this. And there's a prophetic picture behind it. By the way, in the book of Revelation, it's all written as an imperial edict, the structure. Scholars know this, by the way. The scholars have come to the conclusion that the book of Revelation and the structure of the first 3 chapters is written in the structure of a imperial edict from a great king towards his people. All right? Now, when you understand the legality of the Bible, then you understand the seriousness of what the temple represents as the core and the hub of authority of the house of God, which is his throne. You know this. Ki mitzion tete Torah, right? You know that song, right? Ki mitzion tete Torah. Out of Zion shall come forth the Torah. Now, this is an important song. It's in every synagogue for the service when the Torah scroll is brought out of the ark. Ki mitzion tete Torah. Ki mitzion. That's actually, Zion is actually the temple, the city, the people. And out of Zion shall come from the Torah. And the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. That's the temple. That's the hub. Like the White House in America and like those places in which they have the center of authority in every country. All right? So when we look into the temple language, let's go right into it. I use a methodology. And I'm going to share with you my methodology. For the last 15 years, I have developed a methodology for my own studies. People ask me all the time, Rico, how do you manage to make connections? The information is nothing new. There's nothing I'm going to tell you that is new. But I don't even want you to believe me. I challenge you to go back and look at it and go validate it. I tell that to all my students, and they all do, actually. They go back and look it up. And if I'm wrong in something, I'll fix it. It's not a problem. I'm not afraid to be wrong. It happens so many times. I'm like, okay, let's accept you're going to be wrong eventually. Okay? So as we understand the Bible, we have to develop a methodology. So the temple is about life. When you look at the temple, and I wish I had more time, but I don't, to explain about that map and what it represents. So why study the temple language in the New Testament? First, we have to understand, and we should consider, that the temple represents life. Everything that means life stems from the hub of authority. That's why when you look at the services, nothing was connected. For example, there were no services that were performed at night. None of the animals were ever slaughtered at night. None of them. The service was so serious that the morning lamb was slaughtered in an area northwest, in the second ring, northwest of the slaughtering area, where the light will come in the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. They cannot even slaughter in the shadow because of the underworld deities. They used to do apotopreg worship, underworld worship, and they did it at night. So therefore, in the temple, nothing was done at night. That's why the priests could not have long hair, because long hair was a sign of mourning in the ancient world. That's why women were not allowed to be priestesses, because priestesses were for temple prostitution. So the Lord is protecting your integrity and your honor in regards to that. That's why there was a threshold that women cannot go beyond the court of the women. Not because he's trying to limit women to have the blessing, but because of menstrual cycle and impurity, you cannot go up. And also because of the perception of the ancient world in regards to women prostitution. So therefore, he's protecting you. You know, he doesn't want anybody to think that in the temple there was temple prostitution. When you read the book of Ezekiel, it tells you that at one point when Israel departed from the will of God, they practiced these things. And the Lord says, no, we don't do that. That's why, you know, the service was done in silence. You just read about Balak and Balaam, right? Balaam. Now, you notice that Balaam, he built 7 altars and he did sacrifices, and then he made a very interesting statement. He told you something without telling you something. He said there's no witchcraft or divination against Israel. Right? Well, where did that come from? Because when he built the altars, they used to do what is called reading of the entrails. They used to take the liver and read the liver. That was a way of time of worship and the way they used to do prophecy. Ezekiel talks about this. So when it says that he did not, there's no witchcraft or divination against Israel, because when he would build the altars, he was a prophet of the pagans, and he would actually go to the entrails and read the liver, and he couldn't because there's no such a thing. So therefore, in the temple, God says, by the way, take all of the entrails and put them on the altar. Burn them. I always wonder, why would you have to burn them? So that no one will say that they're doing divination. You see, these things bring things out. Syncretism is the one thing God will never tolerate. Ever. Syncretism. And that's the number one problem we all have. Trying to separate the holy and the profane and the common and unclean. Clean and unclean. And this is what the temple teaches us. What is clean and what is unclean. What is common, what is uncommon. When we understand this language, then all of a sudden Acts chapter 10 and Cornelius makes sense. Don't call what I've cleansed common and unclean. He's using temple language. So we need to examine that. You see? All right, so let's start with a few examples. This is my methodology, okay? So this is my educational ladder. I developed this because my students kept asking me, how is it that you make connections? I guess the gift that the Father's given me is making connections. Like I said, nothing that I share with you is new. Okay, I'm not that smart. I'm just using all the resources and trying to put them together. My teacher, Joseph Good, he actually introduced me to areas that I refused to study before. He was able to really entice me to say, there is more to what I'm reading. And I became open to say, okay, there is. Let me look into them. So what I do is everything that I study, I look at, is there archaeological evidence on this? Now, I know the Bible is true. Gotcha. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to prove more than what we know, okay? So I look immediately at the archaeological. I'll go immediately from the bottom of the ground. And then after that, I look at the cultural context, historical context, geographical context, context of the temple, legal context of the Bible. This is one thing we never consider. The Torah is a legal binding document. It's a constitution. It has theological principles within them, but it's actually a legal binding constitution. It has judicial law, civil law, real estate laws. It has civil matters. It has everything you need to establish a government and a nation. So that's how I perceive it. To me, this is not about religion. No, there are theological principles because the deity, the God of creation, he is the great king. And he has established his son to rule over us, right? So therefore, he is establishing a kingdom. So we need to know what our role is in God's kingdom. How will we learn that if we don't know how he established his kingdom in his house? So his house has order, has function, has purpose. Then you know what God requires of you. Many people always ask, what is God's will for my life? Well, I found my will, my God's will in my life when I began to study the temple. I said, oh, I get it. Teach holy and profane, clean and unclean. Just teach the kingdom. In Spanish, that's what I've done. I got myself in big trouble once I started teaching the commandments. I was good with the other teachers. They liked me. And then I said, you know what? I want to start teaching the commandments of the Lord one by one in each Torah portion. Mind you, there's one Torah portion that has over 50. Okay? Do you know 1 Corinthians is actually quoting 20 of Kedoshim? I mean, Paul is using all over the commandments. So I began to teach about the commandments, and then when the people began to see what the context of the commandment was, those teachers who were not equipped to teach about the commandments, who were actually sharing things against the commandments, they became exposed. Not because I did that, it's because you saw it. You read it, you go, wait a minute, how come they never told me that? So I always said education eliminates manipulation. I'm telling you, education eliminates manipulation, specifically theological ones. You know, we come from that background. Sometimes we struggle because what is truth anymore? Go back to the hub of authority and go back to the commandments, and then you understand a little bit more about this. So what I do, in order for me to come to a understanding of the biblical text, I need to look at one of those areas. I'm not saying that I'm going to be teaching 2 hours on each, which sometimes I could, based on the topic. So what I've done with my students, I have about 13 guys. ladies and men, in Spanish. I decided to do homework this year. Each Torah portion, I have one guy teaching it in the topic of archaeology. So let's say this week's Torah portion, and then I ask you, okay, you're going to teach this week's Torah portion in the context of archaeology, 10 minutes. You don't need to do more than that. And then you do it in the context of cultural background. And then you do it in the historical, geographical, and so on and so forth. Everyone focuses on that area for that 1 week. And then you have a study. How much will you get out of it? Because you see, you may not focus on archaeology, but you just did for a whole week. You're going to share something like Gary just shared with me, the stuff that he's doing on grafting. Well, I've been studying on that because I just did a teaching on the book of Romans, chapter 11, and it was amazing how the grafting process was in the Mediterranean. But he told me, man, do you know this? I said, no, I need to talk to you about it because he's been doing it more than I have. Now we can exchange and talk and learn from one another. And that's what the whole idea about the Bible is. Sometimes we get in trouble because we don't really open our minds to understand that there are different levels of understanding and not everybody's going to understand them all. So what we found is when we focus people on certain areas, and by the way, if you're covering archaeology, next week you will cover the cultural background. And the next week you cover the next one up, so it's an educational ladder. Okay? By the end of the week, everyone is already listening to each other, and they go, man, I never thought about that. And I never considered that before. Now we're learning. And that's not my methodology. This is my educational ladder. My methodology actually is it's a teaching method in which I have 6 spheres. I have covenants, righteousness and justice, honor and shame, new creation motifs, order and chaos, and sacred space. All those areas I actually studied for years. So what I do is trying to look at the Bible from those different perspectives. So I look at it and I go like, okay, so how am I going to approach this week's Torah portion? You know, and I do that with everything now. I sit there and say, how can I bring something to the table? And it challenges me to learn something new. And I'm hoping that you consider when you watch my teachings that that's how I do it. So it's nothing new. I'm giving you the blueprint for it so anyone can really do it. I'm going to put it into practice here. Okay? I may not be able to cover all of these. That's not really the point. Well, I want to share with you more or less the interest of why you should consider looking into the language of the temple. Okay? In order to do that, by the way, one of the projects that I want to do eventually, take all 279 commandments that are directly linked with the temple and teach on every single one of them. I mean, look, sacred name, arguments, right? It's about temple. The feast, temple. The offerings and tithe, temple language. Then you have the calendars. Oh, Lord. Temple. You know, judicial matters, temple. Jubilee, temple. Shemitah, sabbatical year, the temple. Foods, what to eat, temple. Everything connects with it. So why not dedicate a little time to understand how God's authority about those things and what he tells us to do in order to get a greater understanding of what our duties should be in regards to those things. All right, so let me give you an example. Let's go to Revelation chapter 4. Give you some verses. We're going to be doing some reading. On my website, on wisdomandtorah.com, I have, keep doing this, sorry. I have study on the book of Corinthians, chapter by chapter, Romans, chapter by chapter, book of Hebrews, chapter by chapter, and I'm going to start Revelation when I'm done with Romans. I'm on chapter 14. So if you want to do a study on the New Testament, chapter by chapter, guys, it's not theological. It's not about Hebrew roots or Messianics. We're going to the academic world. We're looking at what is called literary genre. We're looking at the Greek. We're looking at the cultural background. We're talking about imperial worship. We're talking about the Greco-Roman law. We're trying to connect the whole background behind Paul's words. I was there. I was in Rome. And it was incredible that I went to the museum. It's a beautiful museum, Jewish museum. And the guy was talking, and then he just made mention that the Jews used to be on the other side of the river. But they moved over where they are now because of a flood in the late 1800s. So, hey, I'm thinking, well, if they were living on that side, and Paul lived in Rome for 2 years, the last chapter of the book of Acts tells you, The last verses tells you Paul lived in Rome for 2 years. But no one asked, where in Rome? Well, now we know why. Now we know where. I just released the last video. My son just edited them all. And we just released the last one. And if you watch it, I was really tired. So I watched it this morning going like, man, I look tired and old. Anyway, but I was able to go to the ancient synagogue that was there from the Middle Ages. Now understand something. The Jews, when they built a synagogue, they were not just destroying and building in different places. Normally, the community was in the same place. More than likely, either that was the synagogue that Paul went to or was right nearby it. So I asked the guy, where's the old Jewish community? Oh, go over the river. When you go over the river, he gave us the address. And there's the ancient Middle Ages, the synagogue from the Middle Ages. I was able to see it. It's incredible. Now we know the area where Paul lived. It's really cool because now we know. Literally, we walked over the bridge where Paul walked. It's kind of nice. You know, and then you get to see what he dealt with and the paganism and how they lived and the challenges they had in the first century. If you study Greco-Roman law and Greco-Roman culture, you'll be shocked how in the world the Jews can live in that environment. It was toxic. It was completely immoral. It was something that I'm going like, wow. And they rather live in the diaspora than going back to Israel. It's crazy. It was just weird. Just like today. Same thing today, okay? All right, Revelation chapter 4, verse 1 says this. And after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. Now, let me ask you a question. When I ask the question, I'm not expecting the answer. If you have it, great. If you don't, it's okay. We'll stone you tomorrow after Shabbat. But that is telling you about a time frame in the year. The language of the feast is important. And I'm going to show you chapter 4, chapter 8, and jump to chapter 14 to show you about the second coming of Messiah. And it tells you different time frames. And you'll see it. So what time of the year is this? It says it right there. And I saw, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking. The key word is? But wait a minute. Chapter 5, you have trumpets. Chapter 6, you have trumpets. Chapter 7, you have trumpets. I'm going to show you the differences. So, open door, standing open. You see, in Judaism, they know that when Tishri comes in, or Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah, whichever way you want to call it, they have the door, the books are open. And the doors are open. And we know that the Bible tells us, and Paul and the Jews to this day say, may you be inscribed in the book of life, those 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? Yom HaKippurim, right? The Day of Atonement. Well, on the Day of Atonement, they tell you, may you be sealed in the book of life. That's a language of the time frame. You see, the Bible has a language of the feast. Many people don't consider that. But when you look into Scripture, it has a language. I'll show you what I mean. If I go to the next one, you see. Let's go to Exodus chapter 34, and I'll show you that, and we'll come back to chapter 4 in the book of Revelation. Listen, you're going to see me jumping all over the place. That's just the way I do things. But it'll make sense at the end. Okay? All right, chapter 34, verse 18. Yeah, verse 18. It gives you a language. Specifically, when we look towards, let's go it says, the feast of unleavened bread, verse 18. You shall keep 7 days, and you shall eat unleavened bread. And I command you in the appointed time on the month of Aviv. This is Passover time, right? Okay, so really it's 7 days for unleavened bread. We got that. Then when you move on to verse 22, and you shall observe the Feast of Weeks. What harvest do you do during the Feast of Weeks? Wheat. What harvest do you do during the time of Passover? Barley. So now when you hear anything with barley in the Bible, it's alluding to the spring, Aviv. When you talk about the book of Ruth, it's talking about wheat. That means that the events of the book of Ruth happen between Passover and Shavuot, Pentecost, doing the barley. So if the Bible was written in South America, then it will be upside down, because the spring is going to be in September in South America. They have winter right now. Okay, so, but in the northern hemisphere is the opposite. So if you live in South America, you're going to get the biblical time frames upside down. You see what I'm saying? But you have to tune in with the geographical location that the Bible's talking to and to whom it's speaking with. So when Paul talks about barley and talks about the agricultural cycles in Corinth, understand they're in the same hemisphere. So they all understood about barley and they all understood about wheat, because it happened to be the same time frame when they had the same barley, the same harvest. So prophetically, the Bible has a language using the feasts, in the prophetic picture using agricultural language. That's our focus tonight. Is that okay? So now watch. It says, you shall observe the Feast of Weeks on the first fruits of the week harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. I'm confused. Year's end. When is the agricultural, the end of the year for the agricultural in the Bible? Sukkot, which is September, right? Or October, depending on the year. That's the end of the agricultural year. But in reality, the whole year, the last month of the year from Nisan is Adar, right? Yes? So when it says at year's end, it's telling you the agricultural cycle. So now you have two calendars. Actually, there are four. There are four calendars in the Bible. They're all connected with the temple. The first one is first year of the trees. The Bible tells us that you cannot bring the first fruits into 3 years. You got to plant it 3 years, then you bring the first fruits, right? So when does the first year start? It's right before Adar, Shabbat. Okay? Right before the spring. Then you have the tithing. There are certain animals that you have to bring, that you have to have a year of a lamb of the first year. But what determines a lamb of the first year? I didn't know until I began to study the temple. Did you know that when the lamb is born after 8 days, it's already 1 year old? Because they're counting the time in the womb. So I'm 59 instead of 58. Okay? So, I know, right? It's worse than I thought. So what we have is understanding the reckoning of time. Then you have the month of Elul, right before Tishri, is when you bring the tithe, you start counting for the tithe, the beginning of years for animals. Because you have to bring animals of certain age groups to the temple. Then you have the civil calendar. You never count the Jubilee in the spring. The Jubilee always begins in the fall, right after Yom Kippur, right? You declare the Jubilee. Now that's important, because if Messiah is coming during the fall, in Matthew 24, verse 30-31, he gives you the language when he's coming. There's no secret. We don't know the day or the hour, but we know the season. So we know, we're sober. We know the times and seasons. So the language of the temple in regards to the feast and the language of the harvest, it gives you insight about the timetable of the coming of Mashiach. That makes sense? All right. So then you have the Jubilee and the sabbatical years. That begins in Tishri. So you have a civil calendar and a religious agricultural calendar. So Nisan is important. Nisan is the beginning of years from Exodus chapter 12 all the way to Revelation 22. Everything dealing with prophecy, is actually under, almost 90% dealing with prophecy, deals with the agricultural feast. From Genesis 1 to Exodus 11, they're not using the agricultural cycle. They're using the civil calendar. It's only logical, because Israel was not established as a nation until Exodus 12. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Now, why is this so important? I'm going to move on, And then I'm going to come back to the book of Revelation. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. All right. This is the calendar here. Okay? As you can see, Nisan is the first month of which calendar? The civil or the religious? The religious. Right. So now, I want you to pay attention to this. Nisan is the spring. It's in Spanish there. I couldn't edit it, but we're speaking in tongues. I'll translate for you. All right? Nisan is Aviv. Aviv means spring. Nisan means spring. It's the same thing. Okay? All right. Now, remember, the Babylonian New Year began on the 5th of Nisan, which is Nisan. They all had 2 New Years, in the fall and in the spring. Nothing new. So when they tell you that the whole Nisan thing comes from Babylon, hogwash. It's not true. Because the Babylonian New Year also began in the spring. It's only logical. That's the agricultural cycle. They believe in fertility rituals. So they all began in the spring. It's only logical. For example, the Babylonian New Year began in the spring. They believe that Baal, the rains, came right after the winter into the spring. Winter is death. Nothing grows. The seed were planted, but they don't grow into the spring. So to them, the spring meant resurrection. It was a visual geography of cosmology. The scholars call it visual cosmology. They will see the rains. They worship Baal, the storm god, the rain god, and they say, oh, winter, death, spring, rain, Baal, storm, rain, the earth, Astarte, Asherah, Mother Earth. It's a cosmic sex, fertility ritual. So the sperm of Baal, the rain, has cosmic sex with the earth, and now you have the fruit. And that's why they take the first fruits, and they dedicate it to Baal, and they dedicate it to the fertility rituals. God is telling Israel, no, you're going to show them that it's not Baal, it's not Marduk, it's not any of the other gods, it's I, the God of Israel, who provides the rain, gives you the seed, and gives you the first fruits. And you're going to celebrate the feast in the spring like all them people, except that you're not going to do fertility rituals, and you're not going to bring it to any image, because I want them to know that it's the unknown God they don't see, that you worship, that provides for everything you do. How in the world can we be an example of the God that no one ever known unless there's a contrast between what they do and what the God of Israel does? It's only logical. Okay, is this making sense? Did I get your attention? All right. So now, Nisan is the first month of the agricultural cycle. Tishri is the 7th month of the agricultural cycle, the end of the year for the agricultural cycle. The Bible says that. All right. Tishri now becomes the first month of the civil calendar, the counting of the years from creation. Keep that in mind. And then Nisan becomes the 7th month of the civil calendar. Watch. Count Nisan, Elul, Av. I'm sorry, the other way around. Tishri, right? 1. Chesban, 2. Kislev, 3. Tebet, 4. Shabbat, 5. Adar, 6. And Nisan, 7. When you count Nisan, you go Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, and Tishri. Tishri becomes the 7th. You get that? Okay, let's go to Genesis. Chapter 8. Verse 3. I'm going to show you the importance of the temple language. And Yeshua told us in chapter 8, listen, just as it was in the days of Noah, so too it will be in the days of Ben Adam, son of man. Wow. Now, you keep that in mind, because when we get to chapter 14, that's going to make more sense. Son of man, Ben Adam. To understand Ben Adam, you have to understand Daniel 7:13. Who was the son of man? You notice that when Yeshua said, I am the son of man, they always wanted to kill him. So the question is, why would they want to kill Yeshua for saying, Ani Ben Adam, I am Ben Adam? Ooh, you need to understand what that means. That's alluding to his divine nature. Okay? So when you read it, you understand why they got upset. Then you go back to extra biblical books to tell you all about it. It's quite interesting. Okay? But anyway, focus. So, chapter 8, verse 4. I'm going to read from verse 3. And the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters receded. Now, this is important. New creation motif in the Bible. Anytime you see the waters and the land separate, is a new creation motif. This is important. When they crossed the Red Sea, water and land separated. Creation, water and land separated. Second generation crossing the River Jordan, water and land separated. You see, I taught this before here, but I'm going to quick reminder. In the ancient world, the God that controlled the sea was considered victorious over death, because the sea represented the underworld, chaos, and death. That's going to be very relevant for tomorrow. Okay? Okay, so keep that in mind. The fact that there's an Ark of a Covenant, the Ark of Noah. The word Noah means rest. Rest was an idiom in the ancient Near East for ruling and kingship. So when the Lord rests on the Sabbath day, he wasn't tired. He is ruling from his creation. So he's resting. He's ruling on the earth now. He rests. So that's why the president, he swears, he makes that he's going to follow the Constitution. And then he goes to the White House. There's the Oval Office, and there's his house. He's resting in the White House. He's ruling from the White House. That's what it means. Okay, so now, the earth, there's a divine judgment. God declares judgment on the earth because of violence and whatever. There's water, and then everyone drowns. That means that everyone was found guilty of the accusation, and only the righteous, people who are inside the ark, survive the waters. Salvation, guys. Just what happened to Moses, remember? Okay, so now, when the waters recede, anyone who studies ancient Near East, they know that's a new creation motif. That's why you go into to do a mikveh, you do immersion, the baptism, new creation. All right, from death to life. Not even one amen. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Verse 4. And the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. All right. Great piece of information. There's divine judgment. Noah, which means rest, with people all together, the righteous. They survive the chaotic waters. The unrighteous all drown, they die, and the righteous survive. What happened on that day in history? What happened on that day in history? If you understand the calendars, you know exactly the event that occurred on that time frame. It's giving you a timetable. Resurrection. You see, because Nisan becomes the 7th month if you're counting from Tishri. The 17th day of the month is the resurrection day. This is how Paul can go into a synagogue, open the 5 books of Moses, and show the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua, and he did not have the New Testament. That was the words that I read in the Gospels that challenged me to change. When I remember reading that, I'm thinking, wait a second. I asked myself a question. Am I equipped to open the Torah scroll, even if it's in English, the Tanakh or the Chumash in English, and talk to a Jewish person about the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua, only using the 5 books of Moses? At that time, I could not. But wait a minute. John, Paul, Peter, Yeshua, and everyone did in the first century. And they didn't have the first century writings. So what's going on? Why do I need to go to a Jewish guy and say, well, Matthew said, well, yeah, of course it's going to help us, because this is the evidence of Yeshua exists, and he existed, and he did everything according to the Torah. But we should be able to be equipped to open the Torah and says, right there. It's about new creation. Right here. It's the language of the Bible. These are the prophecies that talked about Messiah. Are you with me? And that's the challenge that I've been trying to wrestle with the last 5 years, trying to learn how to do that. Because I'm no longer just having conversation with Christian brothers or Messianics. Now I'm having conversations with Orthodox rabbis. And they ask you. You better be on point when they ask you. You don't get those opportunities very often. Okay, so now you have the resurrection on that day. Let's go to chapter 8, verse 13. Are you enjoying yourself? Verse 13. Remember, I haven't forgotten. We're going to go back to Revelation 4. Then chapter 8. Then chapter 14. And that's all the time we're going to have. Okay, I want to really pick your interest to say, wow, maybe I never heard this before. Or maybe you heard it. You never really thought about it. Again, I'm not teaching anything new. I'm just connecting it with the temple. All right. In chapter 8, verse 13, it says, "And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and indeed the surface of the ground was dry." What month is that? Don't tell him, Pastor. Don't tell him. What month is that? Now, if you understand what month is that, then you will understand why on Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah, one of the names of Rosh Hashanah is Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, the day of the sounding of the trumpets. And I used to ask, why do we need to remember what? And why do we need to sound the trumpets? By the way, Yom Teruah, which everyone has an argument, well, it's not Rosh Hashanah. That comes from Babylon. It just means head of the year. It's just so much stuff going on. It's crazy. Yom Teruah is the name of the service that was done in the temple. That's what Yom Teruah is, the sounding of trumpets. You did it in the temple. But the question is, what are you remembering? Yom Hadin, Yom HaKiseh, Yom HaZikaron. They have the day of judgment, the day of enthronement, the day of remembrance. There are different themes that you find within the observance of the day of the new year, Rosh Hashanah. If you follow those names, you can see them all through the letters of Paul. At the sound of the last trump, Yom Teruah. The sound of the great trump, Yom Kippur, the shofar. Does that make sense? Then you know the times and seasons. Then you know what Paul is trying to tell you. In regards to times and seasons, I should not have to tell you. That's what Paul said. Because they understood the biblical language. Okay, so what are we remembering on the day of trumpets? Because we blow 100 times, right? Why? Because it was the day when God was declared triumphant over creation, when he defeated Leviathan, the dragon, death, when Noah came out of the ark and built the altar, dedicating the authority of God back to the Lord. We are remembering the enthronement of God after the flood. And therefore now death is synonymous, right, with that judgment. Resurrection is now what Yeshua come to do. Why do you think Yeshua walked on water for? Let me ask you, brother, if Yeshua never walked on water, would that have eliminated him as the Messiah? So why did he? That's important, right? Again, water represented the way to the underworld. Peter goes down. He calls out, "Save me!" And immediately he pulled them out. Resurrection message. And now you understand why Genesis 1 says, "And the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters of the sea," because he declared himself victorious over death. That's what creation chapter 1 is about, that God has dominion over life and death. That's resurrection message in Genesis 1 verse 2. You can say amen. It's okay. All right? All right. Okay, so all right, so now we understand prophecy from Genesis. When my teacher taught me this, it blew me away. I mean, I'm sure many people know this, but I did not know that about 10 years ago. I was blown away. And that's when my journey began. I'm thinking, I get it. I need to understand the temple language to understand the prophetic timetable. Guys, the whole world is blowing up with fear. The world don't know what in the world is going on. One of the benefits of studying history, archaeology, history, and the Bible, it's like it's cyclical. We are at the exact threshold of what happened in the Roman Empire and its demise. We're exactly what happened. So it's like you go through the Middle Ages, the same thing. Every great kingdom, the same thing. I know exactly what's going to happen next. If we get through these elections, I think we may have a 4-year period, a grace period. We better get it together. Personally, I don't think we will. Honestly, I'm going to pray to the Father that we do. But maybe what we need is great tribulation to get it together. Because we're not doing a good job as a kingdom. You know, the only people talking right now are the atheists, the socialists, the communists. They're dominating the whole world and government. The believers don't want to. Even the president, you know, Mr. Trump said the other day, Christians don't want to vote. But the Muslims are. And then the atheists are. And then we worry and we get mad when they're passing policies that are destroying the nation. By the way, did you know? Actually, let me make it stop real quick. See if I find it. I always wondered why the Jews, everywhere they went, they always prospered. And I'm thinking, why is that? There's a verse in Jeremiah 27 that when they went to Babylon, God told the people, He says, pray for the prosperity of where you're at. In other words, pray for the prosperity of the city. In other words, what He said, you're going to be in the dispersion. Pray for the prosperity of the city. In other words, become instrumental in making it grow. The problem is that they assimilated into it. If they would have kept their values and held up to the commandments, their influence would have eventually really given the honor to God because they're prospering. Imagine, they're slaves, they're captives, now they're praying for the community, they're working for the community, they become rich, they become successful in their condition of the exile, and then they're given honor to God. Imagine. By the way, now I understood why the gospel grew so fast, to the point that the Roman Empire needed to say, we need to quit what we're doing and accept Christianity as the religion of the kingdom. Because what happened, Erastus and some of the people who became believers, they became benefactors of the cities. And you see, in the culture in the first century, if you became a benefactor and you did something for the community, like pray for the benefit of the city, then they have to give you honor. Not only give you honor, but give honor to your God. So the more believers became participants of the community and began to enlarge and enhance and make the community better, then everyone around needed to say, well, we need to give this guy honor for all the good deeds he's done for us. And who's the God you worship? And now the God of Israel receive all the honor and the glory. It makes sense. Now I understand why the gospel grew so fast. But we don't do that. We hide in mountains. We don't want to be participants. I'm not saying you're hiding here. It's beautiful up here, by the way. Bad example. We were driving up and said, man, this is beautiful up here. I'd love to live up here. You know, but you go to the valley, so you're good. Is that making sense? You see how exciting the Bible is? When you look at it, it's not just a text trying to talk to a people you never met before. The Bible was written for us, but not to us. We're not the original intended audience. Once I understood that, then it makes sense. Like, oh, okay, the message is for me. But the context, I need to go back to the time frame to understand what it meant. And the principles are the same. A good deed is the same back in the time of Moses as it is today. A homeless and a widow and a needy is the same back then as it is today. Okay, so therefore, when we go now to Revelation again, now we talked about Genesis, and we talked about Revelation chapter 4. It has to do with Yom Teruah. You see what I did to you, though? I started talking in Revelation. I went back to the beginning. Because, see, the book of Genesis begins the way the book of Revelation ends. The book of Revelation begins the way the book of Genesis ends, with the dispersion. The story is the same. The book of Exodus begins the way the book of Genesis ends, with the dispersion. The book of Exodus ends with the tabernacle and the presence of God in the tabernacle in chapter 40, heaven, the garden. And the book of Exodus ends the way the book of Genesis begins, with the garden. It's the same story, retold over and over and over and over. We're not tuning in to that language. That's why we're so disconnected. 49,000 denominations prove it. And you're right. And right now, Hebrew Roots is another one. And if we don't watch ourselves, Messianic is the other way too. We all have problems. We all do. None of us. You know what? I started a new group. It's a study group. I want to work with everybody. You know, we talked about this before. Unfortunately, they put you in a box and people close their minds. And that's why I'm very grateful to you. You know, because when we met, there was a lot of perceptions and, not about me, but about people I hung out with. Thank God you knew, Brad and those people. And I began to develop a group called The Way, Disciples of the Way. It's the title of the first century. Because I'm trying to remove myself from all the boxes, and I want to work with everybody. I think this message can help a Christian, Messianic, a Catholic, and a Hebrew roots person. Would you agree? So that's what I want. I want to be able to hopefully go back to college and keep getting educated and help the brothers in Messiah grow to understand the Bible better. So we can grow together. So we can learn how to keep each other accountable. That's really the whole bottom line. It's not about who knows more than anybody. So how can I help you? Just watching your smile, about some of the stuff I'm saying makes me feel good, because imagine if in a year I come back and you get this and then you start studying yourself, and I'll share resources if you want them, and then you start sharing with other people. Imagine the difference you can make on this mountain. When they see you, hey, why do you do what you do? Man, let me tell you. Have you ever seen the message of resurrection in the book of Genesis? Oh, Yeshua told you in Luke chapter 17, verse 26. Look, in the times of Noah, just as the sign of Jonah, right? Same message. Jonah goes on a ship, on a storm, gets thrown in the sea, gets swallowed up by a fish. It's a resurrection. The whole message is consistent. All right, so now we have Revelation chapter 4. It's about the Day of Trumpets. About Yom Kippur. Let's go to chapter 8. Chapter 8, very important verse, chapter. Check this out. And when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in the heaven about half an hour. How many of you, Tito, ¿me puede traer el agua, por favor? Está ahí en el piso. Gracias. Thank you, son. So how many of you have ever wondered about that half hour? Huh? You heard some versions about that? What do you think it is? Yeah? That's terrible. I was expecting this huge revelation, a spiritual application. It was a woman who said it, not me. That is funny. That's funny. Other than that one, oh man. It's like I knew one pastor who said, hey, you know that God is a baseball fan? In the big inning. He had a whole bunch of jokes about that. Because I play professional baseball. So it's funny talking to a Baptist pastor that for about a half hour he's telling me baseball jokes from the Bible. And I'm going like, you will think he'll find better things to do, right? All right. So let's talk about the half hour. How many of you have wondered about the half hour? Come on, help me out, guys. All right. All right, so it's easy. Go to Luke chapter 1. Luke chapter 1. Talk about Zechariah, right? Zechariah gives you a lot of information. Luke gives you a lot of information about Zechariah here. In verse 10, you probably know this. It says, let's start in verse 9. According to verse 8. So it was that while he was serving as priest before God in order of his division. Now, there were 24 priestly courses. Now, you know how you can teach somebody about the birth of Yeshua without ever mentioning Christmas? You could. That verse gives you the clue. See, there were 24 priestly courses. 1 Chronicles 24. When you read the first 24 priestly courses, then you find out when did they serve in the temple. The first family served Nisan first week. I don't have time to go through the whole thing. Well, he's the ninth. Abia is the ninth. I think the eighth. I'm sorry, the eighth. So he would have been serving on what week? If he starts in Nisan, what week? The ninth week. Why? Because Passover week, they all 24 served. Are you following me here? Okay. So then once you know when he served in the temple, then you know when the angel appeared to him. Then you know when it happened when Elisheva and Miriam found each other in Hanukkah, right? And she was already pregnant, correct? Then you know when John the Baptist was born. Then 6 months later, then you know when Yeshua was born. He was born sometime in Tishri. Now, I don't know about the exact date. It doesn't matter. But the Bible supports that he was not born in December. You don't even have to mention Christmas to anybody. Because, see, Christmas, the month of December, has a strong attachment to feelings and emotions. Some families don't even get together all year except for December. So when you say, hey, Christmas is pagan or whatever, immediately they're going to go, what? Taking away their identity, taking away their emotion. The only time they feel special with family, because all year they don't like each other. But I put this in practice. I went to Mexico. I was in Chihuahua, Mexico. And there was a guy who was studying under another teacher who was very, very, very rude. And he was literally rude. And he was making people feel really, really bad. And the husband said to me, hey, she don't want to accept that Yeshua was not born in December and whatever. And I said, look, man, tomorrow I'm supposed to be doing a teaching about, the 24 priestly courses. Is she coming? Yes, she's coming. So I'll show you what that was about. And I did the teaching, and I told him, I said, I'm going to share with you where, according to the Bible, Yeshua could have been born without talking about Christmas. And I did it. And she came to me afterwards, and I thought she was going to be mad at me. And she said, I want to thank you because you taught me that he was not born in December. I'm a Catholic. She said, I'm a practicing Catholic. And I just wanted to learn. But you showed me today biblically that it didn't happen. She wanted to learn. Sometimes we assume people don't want to learn and we attack. And I was one of those, by the way. I used to be like that. I had to change. I was a Torah terrorist for a while. I was, I admit it. I'm ashamed. I gotcha. I know you've been through it. I know. It's a phase. We go through it because we go through the stages of grief. See, this is one thing I tell people, when you come to people coming through the door, find out where they're at in the stages of grief. Many people are hurt in the church system. Once you know where they're at, then you can minister to them and you know which way to direct them. That's why I decided to go the academic platform from people who start. Because once they understand the information in its context, they're able to heal because now they know the truth and they can deal with the stuff. That 90% of the pastors that I've talked to, every single one of them, I used to feel differently back about 15, 16 years ago. But the more I've educated myself, the more I realize that 95% of the pastors, they're teaching what they were taught. I've never met one guy who said, I went to college to deceive people. I've never met one. They all really want to teach people. But they're dealing with the dogma and their theology and their denominations. That's the struggle. That's the hurdle. Your job is to present the Bible in a way that they're able to reconsider. Our job is not convince people. See, our job is to live the Torah in our daily lives, how I treat my wife, how I treat my children, how I deal with my neighbor. And then based on how we live the Bible, look, my wife will not be sitting there and my daughter-in-law will not be there unless we do what is right. We're not perfect. We're real people. But they will not sit there and respect unless we don't live it. And that's my biggest compliment. And trust me, I'm real all the time with them. But we live the Torah. We need to show what the Torah is about so we can gain credibility with the audience. When we teach this, it's not about knowledge. It's about showing you that there's more than we were taught because we're outside the box now. We don't have to stay within the lines of the denomination. You follow? We are studying the Bible. We want to know how to grow. And this is an example of this. So when you go to Luke chapter 1 and you go to verse 8, it tells you about the divisions. Then you go to verse 9. It says, according to the custom of the priesthood, his lot fell to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. Now that's a whole hour teaching there. All right? And the whole multitude, watch, and the whole multitude of the people was praying outside at the hour of incense. Now, how is that connected with Revelations 8? It takes about 25 minutes. It's called the Amidah. The Amidah, the morning prayers and the afternoon. The Mincha in the afternoon and the morning prayers in the morning, what they used to do in the temple, specifically the priests. They will pray when they do the incense, and they will pray the people outside. When it's talking about the half-hour prayer, is the prayers that even to this day we have in the Siddur. I have the Siddur with me. I can literally do the prayers that they were doing. I pretty much know when was the prayer when the angel showed up. You know, because the language that is using in the narrative, it lets you know the language that is used in the Siddur. It's quite interesting. Okay? All right. Now, let's keep reading. It says, and I saw seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Verse 3 is very important to answer a question in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4. So all of you go to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4. Please. And I want you to read Hebrews 9, verse 4. Now, you may be thinking, man, this guy is going everywhere. Yes, because everything is connected. We're trying to link the connections. I do martial arts the same way. I teach martial arts the same way I teach the Bible. It's all chain link, connecting everything. Self-defense is the same thing. Okay? It's a methodology. No matter what you're doing, you're connecting everything. All right? Who has Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4? Can you please read it? Read it real loud for me.
Which had the golden altar for burning Paraket was a tent called the holiest place. Which had the golden altar for burning incense of the ark of the covenant, entirely covered with gold. In the ark were gold jars containing the manna.
Got it. So it says the golden altar of incense, right? We got a big problem. Because the golden altar of incense was never in the Holy of Holies. Ever. Now, I'm not a betting man. But if I was a betting man, I'll bet Pastor's house, on his car, on his money, that in any other version, it says something different. Who has the different version that says something different than the golden altar of incense? Can you read it, please?
Which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all.
So now we got a big problem. Which one is right? If you know which one is right, then you know which type of the year it's talking about. If you know which time of the year it's talking about in Hebrews, then you have to consider the context of the letter of Hebrews in the context of the time of the year. You need to do the research, because in every Bible it's something different. Some Bible says the golden altar of incense, and other Bible says the golden censers. Two different things altogether. You'll get it if you study the temple. Now let's read verse 3 of chapter 8 of the book of Revelation. Watch this. It says, then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar, and he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar that was before the throne. Now we got a problem. The book of Revelation is correct. Golden censer, there was a big altar, 100 feet long, 20 feet high. That's how big the altar was in the temple. Then the golden censer. Now I know what time of the year is. It's Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. Because the regular days of the year, you will never introduce the golden censer into the Holy of Holies. Only on the Day of Atonement. And the rest of the year, when you will bring the incense, you did it on the incense of silver. I mean, on the silver incense. What do you call it? To carry the incense. The censer. It was silver during the rest of the year. On the Day of Atonement, it was gold. And the golden censer was the first thing introduced into the Holy of Holies, and the last thing removed by the high priest when he entered 4 times on the Day of Atonement. He entered 4 times on the Day of Atonement. You see, we got a problem. By the way, many people say that the book of Hebrews is wrong. No, the translator of the book of Hebrews did not study the temple. Because different versions says different things. If you study the temple, then you know which one's right. So that means that the book of Hebrews should be studied in the context of the Day of Atonement. Then let me ask you a question. How many of you, and be honest, how many of you have never considered studying the letter to the Hebrews in the context of the Day of Atonement? How many of you have never considered studying the tractate of the Mishnah called Yomah, which tells you exactly all the 42 steps that the high priest needed to do on the Day of Atonement? So how can we read the book of Revelation? When chapter 8 forward is about Yom Kippur, and then later on tabernacles. You see my point? So I'm trying to connect it only with the agricultural cycles and also the language of the temple. And this is what I'm trying to share with people. Instead of arguing about theology, why don't we study the language so when we study in its proper context, then prophecy will be more correct and in line with the Bible. Now when you hear something, it's not about logic anymore. It's about structure and truth. People follow logic. You can't be seduced by logic, guys. It's logical. This is a bottle of water. Does it mean that this water is actually purified like it says? It tells you it is. But if you do a test, you're not sure if it is or not, right? I remember in Florida. Florida has one of the worst water ever. And I sold water filters. And we went to the houses and we did this testing on the water. Man, we got people to buy our water filters because the water was so terrible. And once you realize what you're drinking, you're going like, man, I need to buy this because it's going to purify my water. Not really, but you know. And sometimes we say, well, purify water. And we're reading what it says. And we believe because it has a mark of integrity. It's been registered. Surely they have to have credibility. Oh, you buy it. But which type of plastic? If you leave this, let's say the water is purified. And it is. Let's just say it is. You leave this outside in 105 degrees in the gas stations like they do it. It's no longer pure. It's going to be ruined by the plastic. It says pure. You're drinking plastic. That's religion, by the way. Pure. And the environment changes its context. It's no longer a pure word. It's the interpretation that changes. And people follow the interpretation. I don't want that. I want you to go right to the context. I'm taking you to the root. Once I take you to the root, then no one can deceive you. Let me give you another example. Did you get that, right? Okay, let's go to chapter 8, verse 10. Revelation. I'm limited. I only have like 5 more minutes. I got to finish it up. Pastor's getting rid of me. He told me, read the room, man. By the way, I know they're doing good. I want to let you know I'm really grateful for them. I think I found, and we don't talk all the time, but I know that we're friends. And Gary's Lucy here. He's my buddy too. He went to Israel and he had my back all the way. I got to tell you, he had my back. You both have my back. They know what I went through. They have my back. And I have good friends here, And please understand when I call you and I say, hey, I want to visit, it's not like I'm expecting to teach. I really care about you guys and I want to come. And thank you for opening the opportunity to share. So I'm grateful to be here. Okay? All right. So verse 10. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on the third of the rivers and of the springs of water. And the name of the star is wormwood. And a third of the waters became wormwood, bitter. And many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Wow, a lot of people are going to die. Where did you get this from? Bitter waters. Numbers chapter 5. This deals specifically with idolatry. When the children of Israel worshipped the golden calf, what did Moses do? He grinded the golden calf into dust, threw it into the brook that was coming down from the mountain, and he made all of Israel drink it. And the 3,000 that did the worship, they died. Their belly swelled and the thigh rod. This is divine judgment right here. This is how I know it's Yom Kippur. You see, Yom Kippur is divine judgment. You with me? Let's talk about the coming of Messiah. Let's go to chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 14. This is all going to be on temple language. Check this out. After 144,000, and then you have the beast out of the sea. Now, this is important. The beast in the Bible. Have you ever wondered who it is? Okay, check this out. Last year, what did he say? Who said? Oh, yes. He qualifies as that Antichrist for sure. Man. Well, never mind. I forgot. I'm in California. I got to be nice. Right? Last year, I'm in Sukkot. And, we build a sukkah. We have the lulav, and then we do the sukkah. when we're breaking down the sukkah, there's a prayer that goes along with it. May it be your will, O Lord our God, that next year we build our sukkah with the skins of Leviathan. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Well, I've been doing the studies on ancient Near Eastern stuff about the beast and the Leviathan, Rahav, and the dragon, the serpent. It's all the same. Okay? Now, you know how many heads did the dragon had in the ancient world? 7. It's talking about the underworld. Now, it's interesting because now when I learned that on that prayer, I already understood about Sukkot meaning things, but that one really ratified it. It's based on the book of Job. The book of Job is about resurrection. It talks about exactly Leviathan. Now, in the story of Jericho, have you ever wondered why the people of Jericho never came out to fight against the Israelites? They refused. So the 2 spies came into Jericho and they asked the woman, hey, why are you helping us? She said, because we know that your God controls the sea. Remember, whoever controls the sea has dominion over creation, is enthroned as the God of creation. All right. What was her name? What was her name? Rahab. Exactly the same name of the underworld God. Have you seen the image of Ra fighting in the middle of the night against the serpent? You need to look that up on Google. Okay? You can find it. Okay, so when the sun goes down in Egyptian mythology, you got to study Egyptology. Okay, you got to study it. Did you read the book of Exodus? You got to read Egyptology. How about the book of Genesis? Mesopotamian history. The Ugarit, Canaanite history. When you read about Babylon, you got to study Babylonian history. How about Greco-Roman history? They were in the Greco-Roman world in the 1st century. Okay? So you see, you got a lot of homework. All right? So in Egyptology, they believed that the suns go down, then Ra, the sun god, will go on a ship, right? And he'll go into the sky, the heavens, the sea, they called it the sea, to wage war against the serpent. And if you look on the internet, go into images and look for Ra and the serpent. It's going to be a ship, Ra sitting on a throne. Osiris is in the front of the ship, and he or she is putting a spear, the staff, on the head of the serpent, and the head of the serpent is coiled like this under the ship as waves. So every time you see in the Bible waves, waters, rivers, sea, it means death, underworld, chaos. That's why in the story of Jonah, when he says, I know how we can fix the storm, just throw me in the water. That is a stupid idea. I'm in the ship and I'm going to tell, hey, I know how this will stop. Just throw me in the water, dude. And you notice that when he gets thrown in the water, the storm ceases, and everyone inside the ship, they do vows and they do sacrifices. They convert. Well, why will they convert? Because by the storm ceasing and Jonah now proving that it's the God of Israel who has dominion over the sky, the storm, he proves to be the creator. And then he goes into a fish, the serpent, the dragon, Rahab, Leviathan. Where is he going after he came out of the fish? Where did he go? The city of fish, Nineveh, right? And there, the moment he enters the city, they all convert. They were ruthless. I know why he didn't want to go. If it would have been me, I wouldn't have gone either. People from Assyria, people from Nineveh, they were ruthless. Those people were the worst. But why did they convert? Because, you see, he came out of the fish. The fish represented the underworld, represented the underworld God, the ones whom they worship. So that means that the God of Israel had dominion over death. See, now the message makes sense. When Yeshua says, as a sign of Jonah, now he's saying it's about resurrection, defeating death altogether. Yes? Revelation chapter 14, verse 14. And I look, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man. Okay, have you studied the cloud rider in the Ugaritic Canaanite motif? You should. It's quite interesting. I knew I got to smile at that one. It sounds weird. Why is Rico talking about Baal and the cloud rider? Because the cloud rider was considered to be the creator and who had dominion over creation. Why? Because the story goes like this. Baal had a war against Yam, the sea. Marduk had the same war in Mesopotamian history. Marduk had a war against Tiamat, the sea. Okay? Baal, Canaanites, okay, he defeated the sea. So the god El of the pantheon built them a temple called Baal Saphon. Yes? As a sign of victory. So therefore, in the ancient world, whoever defeated the sea was considered to be victorious over creation. Was the enthroned God of creation. Now, put a finger here. Let's go to Exodus 14. I'm doing this on purpose, by the way. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea, opposite Baal Saphon, and shall encamp before the sea. Now God tells Israel, hey, make a left turn, go right, go straight, and there's the water. Notice that all the Israelites were deathly afraid of the water, but none of the Egyptians were. Read the story. The Egyptians were waiting for the pillar of fire to be removed so they can go through it, and the Israelites didn't want to go through. Moses said, hey, Lord, what should I do? Just walk, dude. You know, the Lord tells Moses, just walk. That's right. Just go. Notice that none of the Israelites drowned, but all the Egyptians drowned. That means that Israel became vindicated, justified, and the God of Israel became enthroned in chapter 15 because he had dominion over death. Get it? It's all about resurrection. So now, watch this. When Solomon dedicated the temple, he built the laver. The laver, you know what was the name of the laver? Yam, the sea. I never knew why until I studied the ancient Near East. Now, what's really interesting is the number, the measurement of the laver. 40 se'ah. It's huge. 40. Now, I'm thinking, why 40? We're not 39. We're not 40. We're not 50. Because 40 was the numerical ideogram for Ea and Enki of the ancient gods as having dominion as creators and judge. So when he called the laver the sea, basically it's saying that the God of Israel, the temple, had dominion over death. Oh, you missed it. You got it? Now you know why Yeshua walked on water. Because God sent him to bring the message to Israel that although they're in the dispersion and the realm of death, God will resurrect them. Because God gave them the authority of the Hades and hell. Get it? The sea. It's all resurrection. All right. So it says, verse 14, and I look and behold a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown. He's been enthroned. The enthronement occurred in chapter 4, 5, and 6 of the book of Revelation. The enthronement occurred there. Now watch. It says, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the temple crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud of heaven, on the cloud. Remember, Yeshua got basically crucified because he told Caiaphas, surely you said it. You shall see him riding on the clouds of heaven. He's quoting Daniel 7:13. Yeshua saying, you will see him enthroned as Ben Adam. He's alluding to Daniel 7:13. Have you studied what they believe about that in the first century? You should. It's quite interesting. The whole Qumran community understood about this stuff. They said that a divine being called Melchizedek will come to deliver humanity from death. Exactly what Hebrews 2 tells you. Exactly the same thing. When people come into the Torah and then they go running away from Yeshua into the religion of Judaism, it's like they're not reading the Bible. They're not understanding it. Okay? Okay, so let's keep going. It says, trust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Now, when did Yeshua come? The first time? Come on. When first time? What time season did he die? Passover. That's the first harvest, right? A rabbi asked me one time in 2004, is this Jesus the Messiah? Then how come he died on Passover and not on Yom Kippur? An Orthodox rabbi, Esha Torah at the yeshiva, he asked me that. I was there for 2 weeks. He asked me. I went like, I don't know. You know what it is to go to Israel thinking you know more than the rabbis? And then the rabbis ask you a question you have no idea? You know how humbling that was? I went in there with an agenda. I want to tell the rabbis how smart I was, and they ate me up for lunch. It's embarrassing. I was so ashamed. My wife can tell you, when I came back from Israel, I was a different guy. I did not know anything, and I still don't know. You need to keep learning. I'm telling you, you got to keep learning. Don't close your mind to learning. I'm 58, and I'm going to continue to grow. And I want to keep learning, and I want to keep rectifying what I did wrong. The last 15 years, I have corrected a lot of teachings. My intent was never to do it wrong. I just didn't have the information in my hand. And I was still dealing with logic, remember? Hey, it's purified water. It's been in the sun the whole time. It's purified. All right, here we go. Now watch. Let's talk about a harvest. Yeshua came doing the first fruit of the dead in the spring, right? It says, then he who sat on the cloud thrust his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, who had the power over fire, and he cried out with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in your sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. Okay, what time of the season is that? What time of the season is that? You see, it's ripe. You need to learn the harvest in the Bible. You can't do it in South America because it's opposite. You follow? You got to do it in the northern hemisphere. This is between July, August, but more so during Sukkot. When you go to Sukkot, the olive trees are all picked, the olives and the grapes also. You prune them in the spring. You pick them, the harvest in the fall. So here's telling you the second coming of Messiah. We don't need to be guessing. God knows exactly when he sent his son to gather his bride. But we don't know the language. So we're always seeking and looking for a word. Prophets in the corner. When is Messiah coming over there? And people get disappointed because nothing ever happens. All I'm doing is this. The red heifers are there. I was there in May. I saw all 5. 3 are kosher. 2 have been disqualified. The rabbis who are in charge are friends of ours. Rob Mackover, Rabbi Persoff, and some of the other guys, they actually know Joe and I, and they work with us. He actually requested for me to go meet him in Shiloh to show me the heifers. I've seen them before, but to have the second leading rabbi in Israel have a request to meet us, a believer in Yeshua, he knows it. And then a week later, he granted me a half hour to present to them some of the research Joe and I have been doing, specifically Joe, and he taught me where the altar will be located, and I got a half hour to show an Orthodox rabbi. I think he's the second leading rabbi of the temple in the world. To sit there and he listened for a half hour about a believer in Yeshua, showing them the archaeology, the topography and geography, where the location of the altar will be. And he listened. Now, I'm not saying he believed. I'm not saying that he actually, would know, hey, that's great information. But at least he gave me the respect to listen. That's more respect that some believers in Yeshua within the movement will give us. Which is shameful. Because we're here to edify one another. Right? So now things are happening. The doors are opening. We need you to keep us in prayer. Because now Joe and I, we want to make a trip to Israel just to go talk to them about presenting some of the information about the altar. We know where it is. We have the evidence. Remember, they don't go on the Temple Mount. They don't walk around. They go around the edges on the Temple Mount. Before, they never went up. Now they're starting to go, but they don't walk around some of the areas. I was able to walk it. I was able to see it. So now we're able to have the information and present it to them. Can you imagine if all of a sudden now the Dome of the Rock is now there? And then all of a sudden, yes. And then all of a sudden now the heifers are ready. I know prophetically what needs to happen. We know now exactly where the heifers need to be slaughtered. The piece of land is right there. We know the procedure that needs to take place. We have 3 of them. All we need is 1. It's about a whole bunch of tongues of wood that needs to be done. It takes 3 days. Once we have the ashes, I just start preparing my popcorn. I don't need to freak out. I'm not freaking out. People say, well, why do we need the red heifers? Yeshua came already. You're not understanding. I got a question for you. How do we know the false Messiah is a false Messiah? What is the sign that the Great Tribulation is going to begin? The altar must be defiled, right? Then how can the altar be defiled if it already belongs to the Antichrist? So you need the heifers to sanctify and purify the priests, right? The altar is going to be built in 8 days. That's all it takes. They're going to try to build the rest of the building. But, if they take the Temple Mount, they cannot just do it in 2 minutes. They need to get rid of all the trees because the Torah forbids trees on the Temple Mount. Then you have to take out some of the bodies of the kings from Jordan buried on the western wall. Then you have to cleanse all that out from corpse impurity, right? Then you just sit down. When they start building the altar, well, they don't know where it is. Well, guess who knows? Joseph Good, a believer in Yeshua. And I'm just be tagging along. And then what do you think it is? Oh, yeah, well, according to Conrad Sheik and Charles Warren, you have Cistern 28 in the southeastern corner of the temple platform. You go a certain amount of time, there's the Dome of the Rock, and you count 12 cubits all the way to the east, and the altar is right here, and you start digging there. We know exactly where it is. And now they start building the altar. It takes 8 days. Once the altar's built, then they start doing the offerings. We have the priest. We have the high priest. We need the Sanhedrin. Now, when that happens, the popcorn is taking place. And I'm just sitting in the corner. When they start doing the daily offerings, you're going to start seeing all hell breaking loose. And the popcorn's popping. And I'm going to start eating, waiting for the first guy who's going to come and do one thing. What does the false Messiah need to do in order for the altar to be defiled? He needs to sit. But you need to know where. Because see, no one can sit in the temple except for one person. That was the king of the land of David. And he could not do it in the inside of the temple building. No one was allowed, not even the high priest. He can only go there once a year. King Uzziah, he went in to do the incense, and he received leprosy. But the king of David could sit in the court of Israel, north of the altar. See, when you sit, it's because God appointed you to sit. King Herod never sat there. Agrippa never sat there. Although they were kings of Israel, they were Edomites. They were not of the line of David, so they were never allowed to sit, although they were kings. So when somebody sits like this, it's saying, I am the king of the house. But if they're not the appointed one by God, they are usurping, illegitimate, and now the altar is defiled, and all hell breaks loose. That's what I'm waiting for. It's all temple language. And then once I know the altar is defiled, I'm counting 1,200 and some odd days for the coming of Messiah, and he tells you exactly when he's coming in Matthew 24, and this is my last verse. Matthew 24. Verse 30 and 31 clearly tells you the language. Isn't he coming on the Jubilee? Oh, you're right? We believe that, right? When do you declare the Jubilee? On what day? After which day? At the end of the Day of Atonement, they sound the great shofar. It's not the lone one, it's the ram's horn. Okay, watch. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Then the sign of Ben Adam, the Son of Man, will appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Daniel 7:13. That's enthronement language. Okay, and then it tells you, and he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Yom Kippur, after the Day of Atonement, you can only sound the shofar when the temple stood. When the temple stood, you only sounded the shofar on the day after the Day of Atonement, in the year you declare the Jubilee. So you only heard the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur only when you declare the Jubilee in the 50-year cycle. How many of you did not know that? Now, nowadays, they blow it every Yom Kippur because they don't know when Messiah is coming now, okay? But in the temple period, you just didn't blow the shofar any which time you wanted to. You only did it at certain times, in certain time frames, in a certain service, specifically Jubilee, the Yovel. You only did it at the end of the Yom Kippur when God granted remission and then he forgave the debt. And he brought all the restoration of land, all restoring back to your inheritance and your land and your house. That's the regathering of the exiles that the Jews pray every day in the Amidah. Sound the great shofar of our freedom and raise a banner of our freedom. That banner was Yeshua. He was raised 2,000 years ago to give us freedom. Not to restore to a regular house, to be freed from death. And that's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow when you show up. And you hear about why the gospel is being taught the proper way if we follow the Bible. And what is it that Yeshua come to do? To eliminate the Torah or to eliminate death? Which one? I'm going to show you the verses that will give you the evidence of the work of the redemption of Yeshua by the will of the Father who has allowed us to be part of his kingdom. Have this make sense tonight? So I'm trying to compel, hopefully, a compelling argument for you to say, hey, we never heard about the temple language of the New Testament. Maybe someday, I don't know. Maybe someday, maybe you consider doing a temple course over here in California. I don't know. Maybe, maybe. Am I doing a good job? I don't know. Anyway, thank you guys. Shabbat Shalom.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm going to have you do the blessing, okay?
Yes, sir.
You want my to lead or?
No, it's okay.
Okay. How many guys were, how many were blessed? You know, when we study the Word of God the way it's supposed to be studied, it brings life to us. And all of us, no matter where we're at in our walk with God, there's more to learn. And we mustn't, remember, our traditions keep us from the power of God. And the church is filled with traditions. And good, bad, or whatever, doesn't matter. We need to be seekers of truth. And then take that truth and apply it to our lives to the best of our ability. And that's a process. It's not going to happen in the next 3 days. It's a process. But no matter where you're at, every one of us can progress further. This, you know, I hate the word progressive, but our faith is progressive. We go from faith to faith, glory to glory. Amen? And I really would like to do a temple conference on the West Coast. I mean, why should we have to go to Orlando? You know what I mean? So we might plan something. How many would be interested in something like that? And that's not a freebie, by the way. How many would be interested? All right, okay. We'll set it up.
Cool.
We'll set it up. All right, guys, tomorrow we're going to get the rest of the teaching. I want to encourage you to come down. Don't get half the meal. Amen? Rico's come from the East Coast, and it's our honor and privilege to have him and his family with us. And to, you know, you don't get this kind of teaching just anywhere. Amen? So let's go ahead and stand, and I've asked Rico to close us off with the blessing tonight. And also, the basket is up here. Guys, the word of the Lord tells us whenever you have an opportunity to give generously. And so guess what? I'm giving you the opportunity to give. Bring your offering up here to the basket. If you're making out a check, make it out to Shiloh and we'll make the transfer. Okay? And with that, hopefully we'll see you all in the morning.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Father, for the privilege to be your servants, to hear about your word. Allow us to open our minds to your Torah, that we may run after your commandments. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to come to this congregation and to share what we're learning. May be a blessing to them, Please, oh Lord, that your word will be clear to them and that they get excited about studying your house, to revere you, to thank you, to uplift you, to praise you the way you, my King, deserve to be honored and revered and praised. In Numbers chapter 6, verse 22 says, And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Please come down tomorrow, and I pray that the teaching will be a blessing to you. And we'll see you. Shalom.